Jerry Jones made the call. The offer was real. $200 million, a fresh start in Dallas, one of the biggest brands in sports, backed by an owner desperate to win one more before time runs out. And somehow, Shedeur Sanders said no. Not later, not after negotiations, not after thinking it over. He said no. And that's where this story stops making sense, at least on the surface. Because players don't walk away from that kind of money. They don't turn down a franchise like Dallas. They don't reject an opportunity that could instantly change their career, their status, their legacy. So why did he? Because this wasn't just about money. It wasn't even just about football. There's been a lot of buzz around this situation, with some reports suggesting that multiple forces were pushing Shedeur toward that decision. The Cowboys building a serious offer behind the scenes, analysts publicly discussing trade packages, and at the same time, a growing narrative claiming his future in Cleveland might not even exist. Think about that for a second. On one side, you've got a $200 million opportunity calling your name. On the other, you've got people saying you're replaceable anyway. That's not coincidence. That's pressure. And yet, he still stayed. Which tells you something important. This decision wasn't emotional. It wasn't rushed. It was calculated. Because while everyone else was reacting to headlines, rumors, and speculation, Shedeur Sanders was looking at the bigger picture. The pattern. The same cycle we've seen before. Build up the next draft class, question the current quarterback, create doubt, and push the narrative forward until it feels real. And instead of falling into it, he stepped outside of it. But here, where it gets even more interesting. Because the moment he said no, everything changed. This wasn't a rumor. It wasn't fan speculation. It wasn't one of those what-if scenarios people throw around during the off-season. This was real. Jerry Jones made the call, and the number attached to it was massive. $200 million. Now think about what that actually means. This isn't just a contract, it's a statement. It's a franchise saying, we're all in on you. And when that franchise is Dallas, that statement hits even harder. Because this isn't just any team. It's the Cowboys. A global brand, a massive fan base, a front office with resources most teams can't match, and most importantly, an owner who doesn't think in small moves. Jerry Jones has never played it safe. But right now, there's a different kind of urgency behind his decisions. There's been a lot of talk, based on interviews and public comments, that he's not thinking long-term anymore. He's thinking legacy. One more run, one more Super Bowl before his window closes. And when an owner starts thinking like that, draft picks stop mattering. Future plans stop mattering. Everything becomes about right now. Which explains why this offer wasn't just big, it was aggressive. Calculated. Because from Dallas' perspective, they weren't just chasing a quarterback. They were targeting a solution. There's been growing belief that after watching how Shedeur Sanders handled his situation, limited reps, pressure, still finding ways to win, Dallas saw something others were questioning. Not potential. Proof. And that's what made this different. This wasn't a gamble. This was an evaluation. A decision made after watching everything unfold and deciding, that's our guy. And once that decision was made, the offer followed. But here's the part most people are missing. This wasn't just about Dallas wanting a quarterback. There's been increasing buzz that trade frameworks were already being discussed publicly. Analysts modeling deals, breaking down pick packages, talking about what Cleveland could get in return. In other words, this wasn't a surprise call. The groundwork had already been laid. The narrative had already started forming. And at the center of all of it was one question. Would Cleveland actually move him? But that question didn't matter in the end, because the real decision was Cleveland's to make. It was his. And what he did next, nobody expected. And this is where the story flips completely. Because turning down $200 million isn't normal. It's not something players do casually. It's not something agents recommend. And it's definitely not something you do if you're unsure about your situation. So the question becomes, why? Why would Shedeur Sanders walk away from that kind of opportunity? Because from the outside, it looks simple. Bigger market, bigger spotlight, more money, a franchise that's always in the conversation. But from his perspective, it wasn't that simple at all. Because long before the headlines, before the cameras, before any of this became public, Shedeur had already made his decision. There's been a lot of talk about how early he was inside the Cleveland facility, early mornings, building relationships, learning the system, getting comfortable with the coaching staff before the attention even showed up. That matters, because when a player chooses a situation early, before the hype, before the noise, it usually means something deeper than just football. It means trust. And trust isn't something you walk away from easily. Now add another layer to this. While Dallas was building a massive offer behind the scenes, there was also a growing narrative happening publicly. Reports suggesting that Cleveland's real future at quarterback might be in college, that the next guy hasn't even entered the league yet. Think about how that sounds to a player already in the building. You're putting in the work. You're building relationships. And at the same time, people are saying you're temporary, replaceable, that your job might not even belong to you in the long run. That's pressure. And there's been a lot of buzz suggesting that this wasn't random. It felt like a cycle, a familiar pattern where future prospects get hyped while current players get questioned. And instead of reacting emotionally, Shedeur read it. He understood it. And more importantly, he didn't fall into it. Because taking the Dallas offer would have meant more than just changing teams. It would have meant stepping into someone else's timeline, someone else's expectations, someone else's story. And that's what makes this decision different. He didn't choose the easy path. He chose control. Control over where his career develops. Control over who he builds with. Control over how his story gets written. And once you understand that, the $200 million doesn't look like a missed opportunity anymore. It looks like something he never really considered. But the moment he made that choice, it didn't just end the conversation. It started a much bigger one. And this is where the pressure really starts to show. Because while the $200 million offer was happening behind the scenes, something else was happening out in the open. A narrative, a very specific one, that the future of the Cleveland Browns at quarterback isn't even in the NFL yet. It's in college. Now, to be clear, this didn't come out of nowhere. There's been a lot of buzz, with reports and analysts suggesting that the Browns could eventually look to the next wave of prospects. Names like Arch Manning, Dante Moore, and others started getting mentioned more and more. But here, what made it different? It wasn't just discussion. It started to feel like positioning. Because when you hear the same message repeated enough times, the future QB is in college, this class is loaded, the next guy is better, it begins to shape perception. Even if nothing has actually been proven yet. And that's the key. These are prospects, unproven, still developing, but somehow they were already being framed as upgrades over Shedeur Sanders. And if you're Shedeur, that's not just background noise. That's a message. A message that says you might not be part of the long-term plan. Now combine that with everything else happening at the same time. Dallas calling, massive money on the table, and public conversations suggesting your replacement is already being lined up. That's not random. That's pressure from both sides. And while no one has officially confirmed any coordination, there's been growing speculation that this is how these situations play out. A cycle where future prospects get hyped, current players get questioned, and slowly, the narrative starts pushing toward change. We've seen it before. And according to what's being said around this situation, Shedeur saw it too. Because this exact same type of hype surrounded previous draft classes, big names, big expectations, and then once the games actually started, reality hit. Some struggled. Some didn't live up to the projection. Some weren't ready at all. But by then, the narrative had already done its job. And that's what makes this moment different. Because instead of buying into it, instead of questioning his place, instead of letting that pressure push him toward an easy exit, he rejected it completely. He didn't just turn down Dallas. He turned down the idea that his future was already decided for him. And that decision, it exposed the entire narrative for what it really was. But that leads to an even bigger question. What happens when that narrative doesn't hold up? Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. That future quarterback everyone keeps talking about. He hasn't proven anything. Not yet. Because if you look closely, this exact same cycle has already happened before. Just 1 year ago, the 2026 quarterback class was being hyped the exact same way. Analysts calling it loaded. Fans being told the next superstar was already waiting. Names getting pushed into the spotlight like they were guaranteed to take over the league. And what happened? Reality hit. Vast. There's been a lot of discussion about how several of those same prospects didn't live up to expectations early. Some struggled. Some didn't separate themselves. Some didn't even look ready for the next level. And suddenly, that can't miss class didn't look so certain anymore. But here's what's interesting. The narrative didn't stop. It just shifted forward. Now it's the 2027 class. New names, new hype, same exact message. This is the real group. This is where the future is. This is who teams should be waiting for. And once again, none of it is proven. Because these players haven't taken NFL snaps. They haven't dealt with NFL pressure. They haven't been inside a system, inside a locker room, inside the reality of what it takes to actually perform at that level. But somehow, they're already being positioned as better than Shedeur Sanders, a player who's already been in the building, already worked with coaches, already played meaningful games under pressure, already shown flashes in a situation where everything wasn't built for him. That's the disconnect. One side is projection. The other side is production. And yet the projection keeps getting pushed harder. Why? Because projection is easy. It's clean. It's hypothetical. It doesn't come with mistakes, bad games, or real scrutiny. But once those players actually step on the field, that's when everything changes. And that's exactly what happened before. Which is why this moment matters so much. Because Shedeur didn't just hear the hype. He recognized the pattern. He's watched the cycle play out. Build up the next class. Question the current player. Create doubt. Then repeat. And instead of getting caught in it, he stepped outside of it. He didn't wait for the next name to replace him. He didn't buy into the idea that his position was temporary. He looked at what was real and trusted that over what was projected. But once you see that pattern clearly, it raises a bigger question. If the hype keeps missing, why does it keep getting pushed? And this is where everything starts to connect. Because when you look at the timing of all this, it doesn't feel random anymore. On one side, you've got Jerry Jones making a massive push, a $200 million offer, a clear signal that Dallas sees Shedeur Sanders as the answer right now. But at the exact same time, there's a completely different message being pushed publicly. The Browns' future quarterback is in college. Now pause for a second and look at that setup. Take the money or get replaced anyway. That's the choice being presented. And while nobody has officially confirmed that these things are connected, there's been a lot of buzz suggesting this is how pressure builds in situations like this. Not from one direction, but from multiple angles at once. Because think about how this plays out. You're a young quarterback. You're in the building. You're putting in the work. And suddenly, the outside world is telling you two things at the same time. One team values you enough to offer everything. Another narrative says your current team doesn't fully believe in you. That creates tension. That creates doubt. That forces a decision. And historically, that kind of pressure usually works. Players take the safer route. They follow the money. They go where they feel wanted. Which is exactly why this situation stands out. Because instead of leaning into it, Shedeur stepped back and looked at the full picture. There's been growing speculation that he recognized the pattern early. The same cycle we've already seen: build hype around future prospects, question the current player, and slowly shift perception until moving on feels justified. And when you combine that with a massive external offer, it becomes a perfect storm. But here, the key difference. He didn't react. He read it. He understood what was happening and, more importantly, what it was trying to do. Because once you see that both paths are pushing you away from your current situation, just in different ways, you start to realize something. This isn't just opportunity. It's influence. And instead of choosing between those two options, he rejected both. He didn't follow the money. He didn't follow the narrative. He chose something else entirely. Control. Control over where he plays. Control over how he develops. Control over the story being written about him. And once he made that decision, the entire pressure campaign lost its power. But that decision didn't just affect him. It changed everything for Cleveland. And this is where the entire situation flips. Because up until this point, the conversation has always been centered around one question. Is Shedeur Sanders good enough for the Browns? That's what the narratives were pushing. That's what the speculation was building toward. But the moment he turned down $200 million, that question changed. Completely. Now it becomes something very different. Is Cleveland good enough for Shedeur? And that shift is massive. Because when a quarterback rejects that kind of money from that kind of franchise, it sends a message that goes way beyond football. It tells the organization, I'm choosing you. Not because it's easy. Not because it's comfortable. But because I believe in what's being built here. And that kind of commitment, it forces a response. Because now the Browns aren't just developing a quarterback. They're responsible for proving he made the right decision. That changes everything inside the building. From the front office to the coaching staff, the expectations just went up. Because now this isn't just about potential anymore. It's about validation. There's been a lot of discussion suggesting that when a player makes this kind of move, it strengthens the internal belief system. It builds trust in the locker room. It shows teammates that the organization is worth investing in. But it also creates pressure. Because once a player chooses you over everything else, you can't afford to get it wrong. Now take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Cleveland didn't lose their quarterback. They didn't get forced into a rebuild. They didn't have to start over with another unproven prospect. Instead, they got confirmation. Confirmation that the player they've been building around is all in. And that matters more than any draft pick. More than any hypothetical future prospect. More than any narrative being pushed from the outside. Because for the first time in this entire situation, the Browns have clarity. They know who their quarterback is. They know where they're going. And they know that the person leading that direction chose to be there. But here's the part that makes this even more important. Because now, the pressure isn't just on Shedeur anymore. It's on the organization. To build the right system. To provide the right support. To prove that this belief goes both ways. And if they get that part right, this decision doesn't just stabilize the team. It defines their future. But if they do, that same decision becomes something else entirely. And this is where everything gets real. Because turning down $200 million doesn't remove pressure. It multiplies it. Instantly. The moment Shedeur Sanders said no, the conversation changed, but so did the expectations. Now it's not just about potential anymore. Now it's about proving a point. Because when you walk away from that kind of offer from a team like Dallas, you're not just making a decision. You're making a statement. And statements like that come with consequences. Every throw matters more. Every game gets analyzed harder. Every mistake gets magnified. Because now, whether people admit it or not, everything he does is tied back to that one moment. The decision. Now imagine how that plays out. If Shedeur steps onto the field and performs, confident, composed, producing results, the entire narrative flips. Suddenly, he's not the quarterback people were questioning. He's the one who knew something everyone else didn't. The one who bet on himself. And won. The same voices that pushed doubt, they adjust. The same conversations about replacement, they disappear. And just like that, the Browns don't look uncertain anymore. They look locked in. But if things don't go that way, that's when it gets loud. Because the same decision that looks powerful right now becomes the first thing people point to. Every bad game. They should have taken the deal. Every struggle. He chose this. Every missed opportunity. That $200 million is still out there in the conversation. That's the reality. Because when you take control of your story like this, you don't eliminate pressure. You concentrate it. You put it all on yourself. And that's what makes this moment so different. Because most players don't choose this path. Most take the safer option. The guaranteed money. The fresh start. The easier narrative. But Shedeur didn't. He chose the harder road. The one where everything has to be proven on the field. And here's the part that really matters. Because pressure like this doesn't just break players. It reveals them. It shows who they really are when there's nowhere to hide. And now, there's nowhere to hide. Because the spotlight isn't just on him anymore. It's on the decision. and whether he was right to make it. So when you step back and look at everything, this wasn't just a decision. It was a gamble, a real one. Because Shedeur Sanders didn't just turn down $200 million from Jerry Jones. He rejected the easy path. He rejected the narrative. And more importantly, he chose to bet on himself. Now here's the truth most people won't say out loud. Moves like this don't live in the middle. They don't quietly work out. They don't fade into the background. They either look like genius, or they get questioned every single step of the way. Because if this works, if Shedeur steps into this season and delivers, everything flips. The same people who said Cleveland would replace him, they disappear. The same conversations about future draft classes, they lose all credibility. And the Browns, they go from uncertain to having their guy. A quarterback who chose them, believed in them, and proved he was worth building around. But if it doesn't work, that's when the noise comes back. Louder. Because the same decision that looks powerful right now becomes the center of every conversation. Every bad game gets tied to that moment. Every struggle gets linked back to the offer. They could have had $200 million. They could have reset everything. They could have taken the safe route. That's the reality. Because when you take control of your story like this, you also take responsibility for how it ends. And that's what makes this different. This isn't a player waiting for an opportunity. This is a player choosing his path, choosing the harder road, choosing to prove it instead of avoiding it. And now, there's only one thing left that matters: results. Because no matter how strong the belief is, no matter how clear the decision feels right now, in this league, everything gets decided on the field. So the question isn't just whether he made the right choice. It's whether he can prove it. And that's what makes this so interesting. Because one way or another, we're about to find out. So now I want to hear from you. Was Shedeur Sanders right to turn down $200 million? Or did he leave too much on the table?